turn into. Other things on the ridge, minimum safe speed. What's a minimum safe speed on a ridge? Depends. If you are flying the ridge between the bowl and the sheep shed, 50 to 60 is pretty slow. But if you're going further than that, you really don't want to be going any further than that at low speeds because you just don't have the energy that you need to maintain a little bit of safety margin. And as you're flying towards the new river, you're descending. So you're going to pick up some artificial speed that's not coming from the ridge lift, it's actually coming from your descent towards the river. And as you turn around and start climbing out from the river, you might have been going in at 70 knots, turn around, all of a sudden, you have no safety margin, you're going back uphill at 50 knots and hoping that it keeps working. And of course, wave suppression is something to pay attention to. One of my favorite spots going down to the new river is that area between 460 and the river. Don't think I've made it through there very many times without seeing some wave suppression. Moving on to landing. 16 landing accidents in 2008. 13 were on airports, 3 were off airports. And I may have watched one of those happen. What can happen on landing? Well, traffic moving in on the runway. Accounted for a couple of these. Golf cart driving onto the runway. The pilot bears some responsibility, so does the golf cart. The driver of the golf cart rolling out on the runway. And we've already talked a little bit about that. Hitting obstructions on the runway. Fortunately, we don't have many, but there are some. Landing short is probably one of the more significant risk areas. And how do we get into a situation where we're going to land short?
Poor planning.
In many cases, in most cases, all cases, poor planning. And not paying attention to what's going on as you're executing the plan that you've got. Hard landings, we're getting into the beginning of flying season, and we've got a glider in the club now that has flaps as well as dive brakes. Make sure you know what you're pulling. Retracting the flaps instead of the spoilers on a flap ship will drop you into the ground in a hurry. So preparing to land, preparing that plan. The number one step that I've got on here, it applies more to off-field landings than on-field, but it's very appropriate for an on-field landing. Number one, make the decision that you are going to land. From that point on, you focus entirely on getting the glider safely to the ground, not trying to get that last little bit of the thermal. And flying retractable gear, when I decide to land, my gear comes down. Plan the approach. What is the goal? To get the glider safely on the ground, get you safely on the ground. And your plan has to accomplish that regardless of what you end up flying. Traffic, do you have any traffic that's coming in? Where are you going to run into traffic in the pattern? You might have 2 aircraft entering downwind at the same time. You might be on downwind flying a standard pattern, and as you come to that point where you want to turn on to final, you've got another aircraft that's doing straight in. As you make that turn on to final and start lining up on the runway, where else might you run into traffic? Particularly on a busy day, with people from other clubs flying with us. Calm day.
Coming at you head on.
Coming at you head on. Happens fairly often. So keeping in mind where is all the traffic that you have to deal with. Execute your pre-landing checklist. Don't forget the checklist. And you've got your plan. Monitor your plan. Monitor your performance. Is the glider doing what you expect? Why might it not be doing what you expect? Is there significant wind? Do you have sink? How does that wind affect us? What is a 20-knot headwind going to do to our ground speed? As we're on downwind, we're going to move downwind very quickly. Where do we want to make that turn on to base? A little bit earlier. Maybe a lot earlier. Maybe there's no reason at all to fly past the threshold of the runway. If you've got a 20-knot headwind, how fast are you going to stop once you get headed back into the wind? How much altitude is that going to cost us? Let's see, wind gradient. We've got that 20-knot headwind, we turn on to final, we're flying into 20-knot headwind, we're not going over the ground very fast. We start descending, and as we descend, going through 200 feet, what happens to our headwind? It starts diminishing quickly. And do we have the energy? What happens to our energy as we're doing that? It drops off significantly, so we're making our descent, we get into that gradient, and all of a sudden, our descent gets to be a lot steeper. So that's why we want to carry a little bit of extra energy. And again, that's why we also want to focus on where is our aim point. What's that aim point doing as we're on final? Make sure we have plenty of time on final to be able to monitor that effectively. And that takes us through 3 phases.
You notice a lot of our discussion was about steam avoid and traffic, and especially doing that incident in Minden, and then now with the Pawnee and Cirrus. So I figured I'd hit up on the Roanoke airspace a little bit, and we all kind of know generally where the jet traffic comes, but we've never really had an actual figure to look at exactly where they come. So I'll kind of show where their common arrival routes are and actual flight traces. So just a little quick info there. We're not going to read through all that, of course. Phone number for tower to call, that's right there at the top, 563-5985. And that's what we'll call every day, beginning operations. Let them know we're there, and we let them know that we're done. That way they can account for our presence there. So, just like I was saying there, let them know we're flying. They'll mark an area on their scope so they know to generally route any VFR, IFR traffic around the Newcastle area if they can. If we're expecting to fly further and higher, let them know about that as well. They can account for that accordingly. And at the end of the day, you don't have to call them at the end of operations. If you think we're going to finish in an hour or so, just give them a call, say we're going to be done in an hour. That way they know to close out that area on their scope and they can start routing traffic in a more normal fashion. So the limitations of their radar, may or may not realize this for y'all who fly airplanes in out of Newcastle, but for gliders, the Roanoke radar, it's pretty old. They only see hits above about 5,000 to 6,000 feet anywhere over Newcastle all the way to Blacksburg, just because that nice big ridge that runs north of the Roanoke airport. And their radar antenna is right there on the ground, so it's pretty bad. And then depending on how they have their scope set up, sometimes gliders may not even show up if they're thermally. Because if you think about a glider thermally at 60 knots, it's only staying in about a 300-foot area. So after the radar makes a pass, 10 seconds later, the glider's going to be in the same spot. The radar might as well say we're not even there. Unless you have a transponder, that is, which the K-21 has that luxury. Is it repaired yet, the transponder? Is it operational?
No.
No? Okay. And then same with tow lines. All right. So minimum altitudes, they generally send people around Newcastle. These are IFR altitudes, not VFR. So the majority of the big traffic you'll find anywhere from 5,400, that's the absolute minimum, more like 6,000 to 7,000 and up. VFR can be anywhere, everywhere. They can be lower. It's up to them to have terrain clearance.
Just a note, Andrew, the accident in Boulder may have been prevented if the transponder had been turned on.
Yeah.
On the Pawnee.
Yep, definitely. Because the Cirrus has a collision avoidance system. A lot of new airplanes have MODES and now what's called ADS-B, where every aircraft is talking to each other with GPS coordinates. So yeah, like in Boulder, like Kevin was saying, if that transponder was on, that Cirrus would have actually seen a target closing at them. So that's becoming more and more important these days with the increase in workload on the airspace system. Now we're getting ADS-B and fancy equipment to make up.
Similarly, you showed a picture of the accident in Minden.
Yeah.
Same thing.
Yeah.
The guy taking care of his batteries. And
Really?
Transponder. Oh, yeah.
He's trying to save juice, right? Ooh. And that reminds me, actually, I forgot to